Hello, everybody. This is Ashley. I am back this week to talk to Leslie again. If you don't know what I'm talking about, go back and check last week's episode out. It was first of a series in which we'll do at least 5 episodes. Last week, we talked about the introduction to our new report, Guidance for the Use of AI in the K12 Classroom, which is a free report that we just released that walks you through how you can use AI in your classroom. In the introduction, we learned a little bit about the report, but we also got some tips that you can use even if you haven't seen the report and have no interest in looking at it. So still go back and listen to that episode. The report is built around 4 different pillars, and in each of the next episodes, we'll be going over each of those pillars in depth. This week, Leslie joins me to talk about Pillar 1, which is on how to design cognitively demanding tasks that you can use with your students. So I'm going to take it over to Leslie now.
Hi, Leslie.
Hi, Ashley.
Welcome back. Thank you for coming back for week 2. Glad I didn't scare you away.
Thank you.
So last week, you came in and you talked about the introduction just to your report in general and what it is and how it kind of benefit teachers. But we want to talk in depth about each pillar and what it means for teachers and what it means for students in the K-12 classroom, what it means for K-12 in general. And so this week we're going to talk about Pillar 1, which is cognitively demanding tasks. Can you talk more in depth about what that means and how you came up with it?
Sure. And I would say, I did say that none of the pillars are more important than any of the others. But as the project-based learning program director for SREB, this is probably my favorite. And this is probably the one that I live in the most often in my work. So pillar 1, just to kind of recap, is use AI-infused tools to develop more cognitively demanding tasks that increase student engagement with creative problem solving and innovative thinking. So just breaking that apart, the first part to that is that we could use and leverage AI to create larger assignments, right? So this could be project-based learning. It could be a in-depth inquiry unit. It could be a unit of study. It could be a culminating project. It can run the breadth of lots of things, but ultimately we can use AI to help us plan those. In the past, those type of assignments can take a long time to really plan and make sure that we're aligning that task to standards in our courses. So one of the big things that I talk about in project-based learning is we're not just coming up with fun projects for kids to do. We are coming up with projects that require kids to learn content standards through the solving of that project or through the doing of that project. And so that planning process, it can take a lot of time to really think about, so we can leverage AI tools to help us do that. And right now it's pretty good at helping us do that. The other part to that project is how do we then engage kids in those tasks so that they can't opt out, and I'm using quotation marks, like opt out of the learning process. We know that students, and that might be both K-12 and post-secondary, probably have and will continue to use AI to produce work that looks great, that gets them a grade. And we have to design learning experiences where they can't easily do that, right? And tasks that can't easily be done or reproduced by AI. So it's really thoughtfully thinking about, what do we do in the classroom? What type of things are we asking kids to do that really engages them into problem solving and innovative thinking? Because I truly believe that's the type of thinking most of the careers are going to need coming into this new reality with AI. They're going to have to be creative problem solvers.
Going into something that you just said, I believe one of the speakers we had at one of our commission meetings kind of pointed out the fact that if a student can take the assignment and put it in to ChatGPT or anything like that and get it to do the whole thing for them and do it correctly, yes, that's partly on the student for, getting the work, but it's also partly on the assignment itself for being so easy that ChatGPT can do it, with no thought needed from a human.
And correctly, right? Doing it correctly as
Right.
well.
Doing it
Like,
correctly.
right, with the fidelity. So yeah, so it is we've really got to think about what is it that we're giving kids and how is what we're giving kids diving them into the thinking process. Yeah. And then with that, right? So if we're going to dive them into that creative problem solving process, and innovative process, it's not just about giving them things that can't be done easily by AI, but it is also teaching them how to use the AI tools as part of that process ethically and effectively. So it kind of touches into that pillar 4, which is developing students as users. So we can use pillar 1 to help guide pillar 4. Right. So I do see a connection in particular between those two.
So I think that's a good place to point out because you're talking about multiple of the pillars and we're only talking about pillar one today. I know they're connected and that's fine. I'm just saying that for anybody listening, it's a good place to point out that this report is a free report. You can find it in the show notes. You can find it on our website. You don't even need to fill out any kind of contact form. So as we're talking about it, you can use it. This episode is supposed to help you understand it and help you understand the pillars and how they're going to benefit you. And if you don't have time to read it, you can get some advice from this. But we're not selling you anything. we're, we're not. This is not a sales tool here. It's just a companion piece to the free report. Use and follow along with. So as we reference other pillars, if you have the report with you, if you're driving, just know that you can go look at the report later.
Well,
Point
I
that
might
out.
be trying to sell people on project-based learning in general, but that's not something that you buy into. That's just something that I really want to see more classrooms embrace and do. But I will say that is my bias. That I will freely admit that.
It's different. That's fine. We can sell you on that because I
Yeah.
agree that project-based learning is great. We've done some episodes on project-based learning, and I agree. If you're not embracing project-based learning in your classroom, investigate more. Why aren't you? Let's try
Yep.
it.
Just do email me. I got ideas.
Okay. All right. So, how about a good place to kind of get into this maybe would be an example? Do you have an example maybe of an assignment that was improved through this process or just a really good assignment that uses the concepts of pillar 1?
Sure. I actually, so in a school that I work with here in North Carolina, they're a K-8 school, and they are project-based learning in nature. So every quarter, the students will engage in some type of project-based learning experience. And I believe it was the third grade teachers were trying to revise a project that they've done around community. So they've had stuff in the past and they're wanting to kind of change it around a bit and to make it more meaningful or making sure that it's supporting the standards. So they actually put in the prompt. I actually think with the principal may have also helped them. They put in the prompt and it gave them a nice sort of like, here's a problem statement, and chunked the project into different phases that gave a nice starting point for what a community oriented like a project could be to help support students to understand like parts of a community. And I may be getting that wrong because it was earlier, it was in the fall semester and a lot has happened since then. So that's one idea. Even our coaches, when we train new coaches or we develop new coaches in project-based learning, I ask them to write a PBL unit. So our coaches are starting to see, like they're using AI as a starting point. So putting in, I would like to design a project-based learning unit around these set of standards that also engages this career, and you can get out a nice sort of, problem statement along with some major chunks of the project with, what could be. So you have an outline. I guess it's to say that the AI system can help give you an outline for your PBL unit. I think it's important that when you're doing that, always be considerate of the standards that you want kids to learn from this and make that as part of your prompt in the AI system.
And I think something you kept saying there that's really important to me as a teacher is when I'm working with students, and I do tell them to use AI. I'm very pro AI. I think you have to be after this long of being on this commission, like hearing all the things. But I do try to tell them AI is best in two stages, at least as an English teacher. I don't know if I can say this for every subject, but it's good at the brainstorming stage to help you get started and thinking and like to bounce ideas off of it. You can't talk to a person at you're working on your paper and it's 10 minutes till the deadline, so you don't have time to contact your teacher and you go in. It's a good brainstorming tool to bounce ideas off of. Then maybe at the very end, you wrote a paper, but you gotta say like, hey, can you help me? Like, are there places I should clean up? Are there like I always get in trouble for transitions. I don't have good transitions. Are there places here where I can transition better? So it's good at those stages, but then that middle part is your thinking and your
Should be your thinking and doing.
you're
Yeah.
doing.
Yeah.
And so, but I hear you saying that there with when you were saying it's a good starting point. It's a good starting point. It can help you create an outline.
Yeah.
So I think that's
It can help you create an outline. AI is not going to know your students. It's not going to know their passions and curiosities. It's not going to know necessarily where your students are, at least right now, right? And unless you tell it, it's not going to know where your students struggle and where they succeed and what's going to light a fire in their brains to engage in something. That's you. That is where the teacher shines, is knowing their students and their audience and so AI is the tool to help you create something that's really going to engage their brains. And I would say, and so carrying your analogy, right, it helps us start thinking about it. The teacher still needs to thoughtfully plan those lessons, but it can be a way to generate the worksheets, the activities, the reading, the targeted reading. Like, hey, I have an article that I love, but it's at a 12th grade reading level and I'm working with 8th graders, but I want the content to come down to them. You can use AI to help, rewrite it so that it's at a 8th grade reading level. So it's more, so students can access the information in an easier way. So it can help create those little tools that help make the learning experience come alive and be more supportive of where the students are in their learning journey.
And I think in one of the episodes that we did in the last semester, we talked a little bit about AI and it kind of an example of how to do this where you know their passions, but you might not know, like, you know what their passions are, but you might not know anything about that passion. And a good way is, here's the assignment that I created. My students are really into the TV show The Office, but I don't watch The Office. Can you kind of give me some examples that I can use with this assignment that I created that I know is on grade level, that I know is what I want my students to do, that kind of incorporate their interest in The Office? This is a bad example because I know everything about The Office, but assuming I'd never seen it and that's what my students all watch, then it's a good way to kind of, okay, like we can bring in Jim and Pam here and Michael Scott here just to prove that I know the character.
Yeah. Like, I don't know any sports references, and a lot of my got it because a lot of my kids know sports. I do not. I know Star Trek. I know fantasy, but I do not know sports. I know math, but not sports. So yeah, so I could be able to create some things like help me to be able to explain this to somebody that loves sports.
Right. So in that situation, yes, it's you knowing the passion of the student, but it's not you having to learn everything about that passion, right, in order to incorporate it into your examples.
Yeah.
All right. So let's actually, I know you've done this a little bit, but I really want to break it down because I think it's very important. Let's really define cognitively demanding tasks. What do you mean by that?
Well, at its simple, I really truly mean student thinking, not just what they're doing. And this is the hardest part because it's the thing that you can't really see. We can sometimes see evidence of it in students' eyes or their posture, but it's really doing the things that engage students in deep thinking over a long period of time. And, in the educational spectrum, we try to define this in many different ways. So you have Bloom's taxonomy that, goes from what, might be defined as lower order thinking skills, things that don't require much thought in order to produce an answer. So, that ranges from simple recall, remember, understand, to things that require a lot more thoughtful time, such as analyzing, evaluating, and creating. Another way to look at cognitively demanding is Webb's depth of knowledge. So that goes from recall and reproduction at the lower level. So it does not require a lot of thought. It should be automatic, to more extended or strategic thinking. So DOK3 is more strategic thinking and reasoning through something, and DOK4 is that extended thinking, doing that strategizing over time. In the report, we use Hess's cognitive rigor matrix as a way to define that, because it's one of the only tools that I've seen out there that combines Bloom's taxonomy with Webb's depth of knowledge. And what we're trying to do is find tasks or develop tasks that are in that, what we call the bottom quadrant, where kids are analyzing, evaluating, or creating, but they're doing that engaging in strategic thinking and reasoning or extended thinking. So it really is going to be tasks that have to be done over time, that require multiple stages in a process to support the students thinking through that. And for me, that also means, in a lot of ways, we're trying to train students how to think like somebody in our content. So in math, how do I train students to think like a mathematician? In science, how do I train students to think like a scientist or a historian or a writer or a literary critic? In career tech ed, in my field, how do I help kids think like engineers? How do I help kids think like an automotive technician? How do I help kids think like fill in the blank? So, so in our classrooms and disciplines, that cognitively demanding task is all about how are we engaging in the thought process, and who do we want students to think like, or what thought process skills do we need them to develop as we're looking forward in their educational and life careers.
And I have an example that maybe fits into this from somebody, one of our speakers at one of the commission meetings. This is not an example that I'm thinking of myself, that demonstrates the difference between basic AI tasks, basic tasks that students could use AI on, that are recall tasks, versus maybe something thought-provoking, cognitively demanding, which is, they talked about a common assignment in a lot of history and geography classes. And if you're somebody out there listening and you teach that and you do this, sorry that I'm using this as the example, but a common assignment is to memorize the state capitals. And so it's like they said, oh, well, you can ask ChatGPT, what are the state capitals? It can answer it. And do you really need to memorize that? Like, is it going to, maybe it helps you use some skills in your brain that utilize memorization, but otherwise, that's something that probably later in your life, you need to know the capital of Montana. You don't have to have it memorized. You can just say, hey, Google, what's the capital of Montana? And it's going to tell you. Oh, it's coming on to tell me now. Hush, Gemini, I don't need you. And maybe a more cognitively demanding task is to ask the class, instead of memorizing the capital, a question about capitals. Like, do you notice any trends in cities that become a capital city? Are there rivers near the majority of them? Are there mountains? Like, why did a city become the capital?
Or you're part of a state legislature and are looking to establish a new capital for your state. What would you recommend and why? And develop a proposal for changing your capital location to another capital location, right? Yeah. So yeah, you can, and so think about the depth of knowledge, the research, the things that would have to happen in order for kids to be able to answer that.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's what we're going for here is moving away from that just memorization, recall, and moving into these things that are going to require some actual depth of knowledge, some actual thinking. That's what we mean by cognitively demanding tasks.
Yes.
All right. So going on to the next question here. How can AI help teachers design assignments that do go beyond that recall and the factual answers into these cognitively demanding tasks?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I will say beyond, like, you can use AI to support this, right? Like you can put it in an AI and AI might be able to give you something. This is where I do think Huss's cognitive rigor matrix really shines because she has a matrix per grade level. They have a matrix per content area. And in the matrix, you can look up sort of the nexus. Let's say I want to try and have a task that, and this is like not even just using AI, just really thinking about in your classroom, and where I have used it for teachers is, let's say I really want to do something at the DOK level 3 and 4, and I really want it to be around, I really want to drive their creativity or their creation skills, right? And so I can go to the matrix and find some task starting points that are going to help me to design something around. So for the one that I'm looking at right now that supports reading and listening at the evaluate Bloom's level, but the DOK level 3 level, some tasks might be citing evidence to develop a logical argument for conjectures. So that's going to make me think about, all right, in my classroom, how might I set up a logical, where students are going to have to be able to do research, to cite that evidence, and then develop the logical argument to support a claim of some sort. Now that can be in a lot of different subject areas. It could be in a science classroom where we're maybe doing an investigation and the students are going to have to both do laboratory experiments and research, right? Journal article, online research to develop a claim about something and have to support that claim based on their research and their lab experimentation and write a scientific paper on that. So that's where I do think Hess's matrix, even if you aren't using AI, is a great starting point because it gives you just some task phrases to start thinking about what that might look like in your classroom. And then you
Go ahead. Stay here because this is the part where it's a little visual.
Okay.
And so I do want to point out a couple of things here for the people listening on audio right now. This we're not starting this in general, but we are making these video episodes as well as just the audio podcast episodes. So if you're listening and you're like, okay, I've never looked at these or I haven't seen them in a while or anything like that, you have some choices here. One, you could just look them up. That's a choice. Like,
Yeah.
find them on your own, but you can also find them in the report. They're referenced in the report, so you is that true? Can you find them in the report?
Well, we have an example in the report and
Okay.
we have a link in the report to Hess's work where on their website you can download these matrices for your content area.
Okay. And then also I will put I will edit in here in the video version if you want to watch this on YouTube instead of listening to it, the actual examples of what we're talking about here so you can see them as we're talking about them. So as we're talking about all these models, I know for the people out there driving in the car, maybe if you need that visual, just set a reminder in your brain to look at it when you're not driving anymore. And you can find it in the report or you can go back on YouTube and you can see this part of the episode and you can kind of see the charts because I know that this can be a little complicated when you're just listening to it. So I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
All right. So let's see. Can you walk us through like a specific example of how a teacher might use AI to create a project-based or interdisciplinary assignment?
So, I mean, it starts with what we talked about. You've got to start with your standards, A lot of states now are collecting standards around topics. I'm looking at you, Alabama, because I've been spending a lot of time with Alabama educators. And so I'm very familiar with at least their career tech ed and science standards around larger topics. And so there's a nice collection of standards around a larger topic that can create a unit of study just right there. So start by really thinking about, what is it that the standards are telling me that students need to learn? And I know it feels old school for the educators that are listening to me, but look at the verb. If it says design, if it says evaluate, if it says analyze, that is a great starting point for a more cognitively demanding task. And those verbs are meant for what kids are supposed to be doing in the classroom. Oftentimes, because teachers are inundated with infinite expectations of what kids are supposed to learn, and time is finite. And we are always up against the time. I think sometimes those verbs get lost, and we stick at the topics, and we're pushing the topics through, and we're trying to do things that get us through it quicker. And with that, and I guess I really would love to just, hold teachers' hands and say, let's just slow down a moment. Sometimes those larger standards like design, analyze, there may be other standards up above that support kids, that lead kids to that. So I always start with the standards that have things like evaluate, analyze, design to start my thinking. And then you can go to AI, put in a prompt, give me a PBL assignment that will help support students to learn, and then put in the standards and see what it gives you, right? And then filter it through your kids, your local context, what resources, what tools you have to do. Oftentimes when I'm doing PBL, teachers think that it requires a lot of materials to do. And I'm a designer, I'm an engineer at heart. Start with your constraints. What materials, what resources do you have available for you that can go into that? And then I would think, go offline a little bit. Start thinking about, all right, take what it said, go into your planning document or planning tool or what have you, and start chunking out the phases and attaching learning outcomes to that. Think about what you've done in the past. How can you fit that in here? And really, thoughtfully craft the learning journey for the students. I don't know, did that answer the question? I mean, I feel like it's multifaceted, and it just takes.
I think so, but I think that this is maybe a good place to plug something else here, which is the very, very first episode we did of this podcast. It was on how to create a term that Dan Rock, he was the host of, or the guest coach for that episode. He coined a term that he called spicy AI prompts. And it sounds a lot like what we're saying here now. So and I know things change so much in AI, but I think everything we said in there probably still mostly applies, at least, where he talked about how to write a prompt that's going to lead you towards getting a cognitively demanding, he didn't use those words at the time, but same idea, task, an assignment. It was basically lesson planning. And in that one, he used Chat GPT, but there are others that you can use if you don't use Chat GPT, if you use anything. Do you have, well, let me finish what I was saying, and then I'll ask you that question, because I just thought of another question as I was saying that. So go back and listen to that episode. He talks about how to write a prompt that is going to lead to the things we're talking about here. And it walks you through this episode. We're sticking to the report here, so we don't have time to go into all that. But that's a really good place to insert right here in that episode. It'll walk you through how to create a prompt that is going to get you a lesson that you can use in your class that is going to do all the things we're saying here today. And so I don't think we talked about standards in that episode, but just, apply that. Like when you're writing your prompt, use the standard. And we might have, I don't remember, it's been a while, but use that standard and use it to create your spicy prompts.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, I think the more specificity that you can put in there, the better. What I would say as you were talking that it also reminded me is as you're creating and thinking through that learning experience, you want to think about what is it that you want students to do that guides them through the thinking. That's I feel like is the trick, right? If we just give kids the project and let them go, they are going to want to use AI because they don't have any other direction or how to get into it because we haven't taught them the process. Oftentimes, I think especially at the high school level, we think students should know how to research, take notes, read or understand technical reports. And oftentimes they don't. Nobody has taught them how to do that. So we do have to be very mindful of breaking down the process that an adult would go through in order to solve this problem or to do this task. And so I'm going to have to probably think about it in terms of my engineering brain right now, but a project that my students would do in my classroom in my civil engineering architecture class was to design a 800 square foot house for a client. And the clients were always teachers who had planning period during my class. So I could send my kids to them to interview and come back. Now, if I just sent my kids to go interview teachers without teaching them how to develop interview questions, the information that they're going to be getting from them isn't going to be helpful. So we have to do something in the classroom that helps them develop interview questions to get at what they need, or I just need to go ahead and provide it for them because I don't have time to go through it. Like, here are your starting interview questions, come up with one or two more, and then they're going to have to go. If I were to just say, and then if I stopped there and then like go and design, I'm also not teaching them the architecture process of design. So when they come back to the classroom, we would have lessons on concept mapping your design. So how do we map out the flow of a room? How do we brainstorm where rooms go? What resources might we use to have a starting understanding of layouts and floor plans? So we may have to guide them through that process. And I do think about online and offline experiences. What are the experiences that students need to do in order to think through something off the computer? And how do I guide them through that process? And what are the experiences that they're going to do? And how are they going to use the powerful tools on the computer to support them in that? And then what am I going to give them so that they're guiding them through the process? Another example is doing some type of research or online research. If I just give kids the research questions and ask them to take notes, what you're going to see is students copying and pasting the question into Google or AI, now AI, and then taking the responses, the first response, and copying and pasting it into into their notes. And they're like, hey, I've done it. Thank you, teacher. But if I want them to learn from the experience, I might need to provide a graphic organizer such as an inquiry chart. And what an inquiry chart does is think about, you have questions up at the top. So I'm going to try to be visual. You have questions up at the top, and then each row below the question are spaces for 3 resources. So for my question, I have to look at least 3 resources to answer, to see how they would answer that question. And then I put in my notes. In that phase, students may be copying and pasting, and that's okay, because at the bottom, I'm going to say, based on your research, summarize the answer to the question that best relates to the problem. And they can't necessarily copy and paste that because that has to be their thinking. So we really do have to be mindful of the structures, the tools, the organizers, the processes that we guide kids through so that they are using the tools, any tool, efficiently and ethically. And we're also supporting the learning process at the back end.
So one thing that all this made me think of is we keep talking about using AI and doing these things, but we all know there are lots of different tools Are there any, like, how do I know if I should do this in Chat GPT versus Microsoft Pilot versus one of the ones built specifically for teachers?
Yeah. Well, I mean, one, it's going to be what your district allows and what's at your disposal. So, I mean, don't do anything on your school computer that you're not supposed to do. So that's going to be my first caution. And what is it that you have access to? And one of the things that we have done to help support this is develop a toolkit for districts to strategically and thoughtfully pick tools for their local system. We're calling it the AI checklist in my head that you can also download, and it's also free. And so there are reasons why, and that could be another podcast of why your district may allow one tool versus the other. So you have your large language models, and those tools are going to be I'm afraid of what I'm about to say. I'm going to say they're mostly created the same. Don't come at me. Not. But, if you're a Google district, you might have Google Gemini at your disposal. If you're a Microsoft district, you might have Microsoft Copilot at your disposal. Those are mostly created equal. They work on prompts. They will get you a good starting point. Magic School AI, no, I have not had a chance to play around with the PBL creator, but they have some things built into it that allow for lesson planning and unit creation. And I've heard from teachers that it gives a great starting point. So in summary, use what's available to you, try it out. If it's not giving you what you need and you have access to a different tool, try that one out too. In our interviewing of some teachers for vignettes for our pillars, one of the things that they said is you just kind of have to, if you have a free version available for you, even if it's for a limited time, get in, try it out. If it gets you what you need, then use it. If it doesn't, then stop using it. So you may have to do a little bit of exploring at first.
And I also want to say, you were there, what I'm about to talk about, but we recently had an organization-wide retreat where we all met together and we had this meeting. And I don't know if you were in this session with me or not, but in one of them, we're talking about AI and different tools and like what we're allowed to use in our organization. And one of the people in IT was like, oh, well, because we have Google, we all have Gemini, and you can log into your Gemini through your Google and you can have Gemini, the paid account is already paid for free. And I did not know that at all. I was like, what? I've been paying for ChatGPT on my own just to have it, and I could have been using this for free. So what I learned from that, and what I think anybody out there listening might want to do too, is maybe if you don't know what you have in your district, maybe ask. There might be something that you already have access to and you don't even know you have access to it. So
Yes.
ask and see what you have, if anything, and then base your decision off of that.
Yeah.
What are some of the risks of using AI at all to create these tasks for students, or allowing students to use AI in their work?
Yeah. So I think the first, especially in terms of student use, we have to be very careful about having kids use tools where their data privacy is protected and not sold to third parties. And that comes from federal legislation. There may be some district legislation that also helps protect students' personal rights for that. So tools do have to be procured in your districts that support student data privacy. When teachers are using the tools, do not put in student identifiable information into an AI system, period. That's not even a caution. I guess I'm being bossy. Like, don't do that. The other thing is that, you can get is this over-reliance on technology and, always having students on a screen. And so I do think we have to be mindful of when we're asking kids to interact with stuff on a screen and when we need to interact with stuff in real life. An easy example, and this is even like talking about AI, it's just talking about screen use in the classroom. It is so easy to get and disseminate resources, and we don't have to use paper by putting things on Google Classroom and having kids read it. However, there still is something powerful about reading and writing on a text to help analyze a text and understand what a text is saying. So there might be some things that you still want to print out and close down the computers and give kids a protocol for diving into a text and having conversations that don't have screens between students in those conversations, where kids are grouped in a little mini circle or a square and they're interacting with each other and they don't have screens that are separating them. So just being mindful on how we're using technology and really providing time and space in your classroom for thoughtful learning activities that don't require a screen-based technology.
I heard say, kind of going to your point there, like if you run a classroom where the power went out for the day and you didn't have any access to any of that technology and you can't run the classroom because everything relied on needing that technology, then maybe that's you cross the line.
Yes. Yeah. We might need to be thinking about. I also think about, thinking skills like brainstorming. Brainstorming, works better after you've done some, it could be online research or some actual reading of journals or what have you, and you have the information in your head. But then it actually works better, kind of shutting down the screens, grouping together over a large piece of paper and brain dumping or just generating ideas on paper. And I always used to like to tell people also standing up, not having kids sit down, like putting the paper up on a vertical surface or having it around desks, but the chairs are taken away. So we just have to really be mindful of what we're asking kids to do and not can't be everything on the screen. I mean, the other thing to consider in districts is, I think one of the worries is this access and digital divide. As we go in, there are going to be some districts that are able to afford these AI tools and having kids use them, and there are going to be districts who can't. So I think I don't know if that's a caution for teachers, but just a caution that we did address in the article that we need to be mindful of is we want to make sure that we're not widening the achievement gap further because you have some kids who won't have access. And sometimes it's not economics. It might be because the district has a policy that has outright banned AI and because they don't want to go through this conversation yet. They don't want to go through this process yet. And then you're going to have districts that are already embracing it and have done that work. And the kids who are at least interacting with it in some way and learning how to use it ethically, thoughtfully as part of a larger creation process, they're going to be more, in my opinion, economically viable when they graduate because they will have already been able to use it, but also still know how to learn and how to research. And so that's always my caution. Be thinking about how you want students to think in your classroom. It kind of goes back to the beginning of our conversation. What does it look like to think in this content area? How do I support students to develop those cognitive and thinking processes? And AI is just a part of that journey, but it cannot be the end all and be all of that journey, just like any other tech tool can't be.
And I have a question of something you just kind of said. Prepare you for this. So if you don't have anything, that's fine. But let's think about a teacher that works in a district. They're listening to this right now. They're real fans of it. And they see all the benefits we're talking about here and they want to start using it. But their district is AI is evil. You're not allowed to have it in any way, shape, or form. And they don't want to, we're not going to suggest breaking any rules. We've already said follow what your district says. Do you have any tips on them for maybe starting the conversation to maybe convince their district that maybe we can loosen that policy up a little bit?
I might give them this report and,
Okay.
just say, hey, this is a new report on how AI can be used within the K-12 classroom. Take a look. Can we explore this further? Or at least having the conversation with your administrator who can then have the conversation with the district. You may even want to include our AI checklist along with that, because it's not just a checklist of here are 10 things you need to look at when you're looking at an AI system. It's really a process for having a team in your educational context or educational entity to consider at the beginning stages, in the procurement stage, and the implementation stage, and the monitoring and reflection stage, how to choose tools thoughtfully and support teachers in professional development and students in professional development, and evaluate the process and questions you should be asking yourselves along that whole process. So there are resources available to help schools make those decisions. And I mean, I really do think this report and the AI checklist tool could be great starting points for having those conversations in your district or
And
school.
the checklist also include questions you can print out and just give to vendors.
Yes. Yeah.
You're trying to pick something, so it's very useful. All right, so I do want us to end, but I want us to end on something really practical. So here's my final question for you before we end this episode. What's a small change a teacher could make this week? Well, it's summer, so pretend this is a school week, the first week back from school. So put this pillar into practice.
I would say since it's summertime, I would look at your whatever you're teaching come the fall and find a group of standards, a selection of standards that you would like to plan a cognitively demanding task around. And then just start there. Start planning it out. Use an AI tool that you have available to you to give you ideas. If you have, community partners or people in your vicinity that you can ask, maybe ask them like, hey, how would somebody use these learning things in your world? But yeah, just dive in and develop something. AI can be a great thought partner. That's sort of like one of the biggest opportunities. I can't remember if it's this one or the next one is being able to use AI as a thought partner to plan these ideas out. Find a place where you can get messy in your curriculum and you can try something new and start planning towards that.
All right. So I think that's a great place to end. Thank you again for coming back. And this is a series, so we do have another one. We're going to talk about Pillar 2 next week. And Pillar 2 is going to be the fun one for teachers that want to take some work off their plate, because Pillar 2 is streamlining teacher work.
Yep.
Thank you so much for coming again.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.